Welcome to Outspoken Owls, and in Parliament today, we're delving into triggers, actually our triggers. Whether it's an environment, whether it's a song, whether it's people, what triggers us?
Yeah, what gets us emotionally reactive, right? I would like to just maybe start this off with I know we're talking about our triggers, but just something that I heard, and it made me realize how different we are in terms of what could trigger us. I mean, something could be really soothing and therapeutic for me, but for the next person, it could be a trigger. So I was at the spa and having my nails done, and next to me was a lady with her hands in what they call that caviar. It's a jelly
That gooey
you sit
thing.
in, that gooey thing that you sit and squeeze, and it's very
love it.
soft and it's lovely and it's therapeutic, really. So we were chatting about how therapeutic it is to play with that. And the nail technician that was doing my nails, we asked her, how often do you use it? And she says, no, actually, it's a real trigger for me. And that was interesting because she related to the story of how when she grew up, she would be sometimes responsible at home. They were raising cows. They had cows, and she would have to go, and maybe after it was raining, maybe clean up in the, what do you call it, the cow shed, or I don't know. But she could relate the feeling of barefoot walking sometimes in the cow dung, that squishy feeling to this feeling.
Yes.
And for
so
her it
far
was
removed.
triggering. Yeah, and for her it was triggering because it reminded her of a time that she really didn't enjoy. So I think it's interesting that we need to realize that triggers are so vast and so different for so many people.
It is.
But we're talking about ours now, but I thought that was very interesting to share.
Because it is different from person to person. I think like when you talk about like smell, for me, one of the a trigger is it's a good trigger for me. When I smell weed, over the years, it gives me a happy feeling, not because I want to smoke it, but my dad only smelt of weed his entire life. And it just reminds me of him. So
It's like his scent, his tobacco.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it would be like, oh, that smells so nice.
So is it a good reaction then?
It is, because it reminds me of my
your
dad
dad.
being happy. And when he smoked weed, he was happy. And that for me is a good trigger. And that's the sensory stimulation that happens here when it is about a smell.
I like that you're saying that, because I think many people actually think of triggers just as bad, negative experiences. So there are good triggers and bad triggers. It's anything that brings back a memory or creates an emotional reaction that could either be good or bad.
Yeah.
So whenever I think about triggers, the first thing that always comes to mind was my childhood and sexual abuse as a child. And there are three triggers that's always going to stay with me. The first one is that sound of keys, that clanking, is it clanking sound of keys when somebody holds keys and they put it down. It always brings back that negative memory of this person carrying keys. That smell, I mean, do they even still make Old Spice? I haven't smelled that thing for a long time, but at some point my dad actually used Old Spice, and I clothed my dad because it reminded me that Old Spice smell. So smells are very triggering. And then
But that's a negative trigger for you.
it's negative, and these are all negative, and we'll go into more positive things. But another thing that's weird is like the setting of certain people's eyes are a trigger for me. So if it's small, close set eyes, beady eyes, that man had those eyes. And when I see those eyes, it's an immediate trigger for me. So very, very negative, very upsetting, but these are very deep.
And how do you deal with that trigger when it does happen?
It's about grounding for me, because it's not just trigger, it's actually also takes me into almost a what do you call this thing where you're almost re-experiencing that time.
Yes.
What is it called again? Flashbacks,
Yes.
almost like not
Or
hectic
PTSD,
flashbacks, but that kind of thing. So it's about grounding. It's about almost, what I do is I almost can hold on to something and say, you fine, you fine, you're a grown-up person now, you're in control of your life, you sorted, and then maybe change the smell and eat something that smells better, or actually leave that environment. So I've learned skills, but it's very triggering.
And traumatic events. Of course, we both experience traumatic events in our life, because it becomes like an anniversary date. So for me, one of the biggest triggers and is my birthday, which is on the 22nd of April, and it's a trigger because my sister-in-law passed on that, and was buried on that day. And I don't know some days if I want to celebrate my birthday, because it's like I think about my brother, I think about his family, I think about us, and it's like, well, we say goodbye to someone that was in a traumatic event experience. So it wasn't something that was predicted. So it is my birthday is
it's torn also.
It is.
It's that feeling of, do I celebrate or do I, because we spoke about this, you said your brother's always the first person to phone you on your birthday, but then you also realize that
I'm trying to be conscious and cognizant of that, how he's feeling, because it reminds him of his wife's death day.
But also you guys were very close, so it's a trigger for you on a personal level. And remember, I spoke to you about this. So it's this, I've got a similar situation with my brother having just celebrated his 40th birthday this year in February on the 10th, and that's the date my son was assassinated. So it is very triggering now. I mean, and it's that feeling of, how do I celebrate? So this year, it was his first year, and I said to him, Gary, my brother's name is Gary, I said, it's your 40th birthday, you have to enjoy this birthday. But it's triggering. So for all of it, it was a triggering day. It was also the first anniversary of Kenan's death, so
so it just brings up memories and emotions that's associated with that day, and it's very difficult to be present and without remembering that day.
And as hard as you try,
you can't. It is bittersweet.
It's bittersweet.
And I think I like you, like when you and I spoke about it, it's not about even accepting it. It's really about whatever you feel at that moment. So you do get up, you are emotional, and you become conscious about it. And for me, that again, like you and your brother, for the rest of my life,
it's going to be like that.
It would be there. Yeah. So no amount of therapy will help that trigger.
It's always going to be, but you can learn to adjust to it and deal with it differently. I think this year for us, and you could come in here, because this year for us it was very difficult. It was very difficult this year because it was the first one. I think it will always be difficult, but I do believe that we need to find ways to, because this is now part of life. It's not going to disappear. How do we navigate through it to not spoil that person's birthday every year, because we get so down about what actually happened?
Yeah, and with me, my sister-in-law was the first person that would call me on my birthday, always. In fact, she would remind everybody in the family about my birthday. So again, I think for me, it's like, it's years along, you try to not overthink and overplan it, because you don't know what that emotion is going to be at that time.
Happy triggers.
So
okay, sorry.
So what about words and phrases that trigger us? Let me think.
I can start, because this is something maybe what triggers me still, and I don't know why, as my mom or my parents. Now my mom specifically used to, when I was little, and I'm sure my mother won't even remember this anymore. In fact, it wasn't my mother. It was more my sisters or my family. There was this thing about, you are so moody. I could never understand it. I was a happy child. And I mean, I cannot remember being a moody child, but I was constantly being labeled as moody. So now if anybody says, oh, are you having a bad day? Are you moody? For that split second, I'm like, ugh. And the other one is when people call me crazy. It's like, there was a time when I went through what I feel was really abusive in terms of constantly being said, oh man, you're crazy. It's like dismissing you and calling you crazy. But then afterwards it becomes quite a triggering word for me.
Yeah. So again, going back to childhood, it's really, I don't understand why I cried so much, but I was a crybaby. Like you were moody. I don't understand if our parents at that time kind of found out what was the reason of that moodiness. For me, I don't think my parents ever wondered why I was constantly crying. But I know that that was me. I was a cry baby. And it like, my mother would like, it's just like the devil's got into you. Like, I mean, that's what they would say.
You are the devil's child.
You're like the devil's child. Why are you crying? What are you crying for? I don't know what I'm crying for. I'm 5 years old. I'm 6 years old. I don't know what I am crying for.
So how's that now? So today, as an adult, how does that trigger? So does it make you not want to cry?
No, I don't want to cry.
You don't actually cry a lot.
No, I don't. But because I get angry and then I cry. So it gets to a point of anything is, my sister Zainab was sitting at the table with me once, and she said, so we were all siblings, we were sitting around the table, and I started crying because my brother was like, yeah, but all of these are tests and stuff. And I was like, but why must I be tested all the time? I'm tired of being tested. So, and then of course I burst out crying then. But I cried because I was able to, because it was my siblings. And then, of course, my other siblings got up and walked away. So after that, I asked them, but why did you guys get up and walk away? Like, I would assume that you would come and comfort me. They were like, no, because we were so afraid. We don't see you crying. We were so afraid that you might, like, leave me alone kind of vibe. So I was like, I think that's a thing. People are too afraid because they don't see me cry. Yeah. But I also realized I don't cry for emotional reasons. Okay, we'll talk about a movie and cry. I don't cry for emotional reasons. I cry because I get angry. And that is also a trigger. My anger is a trigger. So that is like, I don't cry for the sake of crying. It gets to a point of me being angry.
You have to be angry.
Then I can cry. But otherwise, from an emotional perspective, it's I can handle the cry. And of course, with the crying, I also think about the dark rings under my eyes. So
you don't want to aggravate it.
I'm not going to cry. I don't have things. So yeah. So I think that is a thing about from the time I'm little. I asked my mom this, and she has no clue. But she just say, I just realized you were just a crybaby all the time. So yeah. So that's a trigger. I think talking about crying in movies. Why is it that we do cry in movies? We know that some of them are not real.
But isn't that just an emotional reaction because we're emotional beings?
Do we think that that person, that character maybe?
Maybe you can identify with certain things.
Because I had my friend Nas said to me the other day, give me a movie because I really feel like crying.
So give me a emotional, sad, tear-jerking kind of movie.
Give me a movie and I really want to cry.
But isn't that just human nature? I mean,
why do we want to cry?
I mean, is that a trigger?
Well, watching a movie that's emotional is a trigger. So whether it's a romantic movie and it's just a soppy love story, or whether it's a heartbreaking movie, we never cry in horror movies. We are scared in horror movies. So there's that trigger of fear.
But so it confuses me a little bit, because for me, a trigger is something that takes you back to something or reminds you of something.
It's an emotional reaction.
Yeah,
to
but
something.
But is it just an emotional reaction, or is it an emotional reaction that is triggered by something that you've experienced
But
before?
I don't think it's necessarily a childhood thing.
No.
Yeah, so I think it could, somebody could trigger you because they said, well, I'm very disappointed in you. And then all of a sudden you get triggered because that's like...
Because it reminds you of something that...
No, it questions my ability to deliver on something. If somebody says, I'm really disappointed in you, you didn't meet your deadline.
For me, I'm thinking there has to be history to that trigger. There is something that makes you feel...
I don't want to be a failure.
Yeah, but why not? Because something else has happened
triggering
that makes
that. We need a therapist for that.
We need a therapist
for that.
Because no, and this is a valid thing, because I think that not everybody. I mean, if somebody says to me, "Oh, I'm really disappointed," it's not a personal thing for me. It's like, oh, you're just disappointed in an action of mine, and you're not disappointed in me.
No, I take that. For me, it's a trigger. Maybe I do need to work on myself on that, but I do. I take it personally.
I'm just going through it, and I'm thinking and that's why I'm saying certain things. Trigger certain people, just like the Old Spice wouldn't trigger you, but it will trigger me because it's so But So
another trigger, if I see a couple fighting and screaming, it is none of my business. Absolutely none of my business. It is a trigger because I've also been
Yes.
in a domestic
But you see what I
abuse,
mean?
and then I would go and make it my business. So yes, at the end of the day, people would like just let them do because they're going to both go home together. But it triggers
It
me
triggers you because you have got
experience
experience of
through that domestic violence, and I want to protect her,
Yeah.
and that nurturing,
instinct.
that instinct of protection. I want to go and save her, but at the end of the day, I know it has nothing to do with me. So it is like, should I mind my own business? But I've tried so much, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I will get involved if I see two people screaming at each other, and it's nothing. I mean, I could get stabbed one day because I'm minding somebody's
But you'll
business.
step in
But
because
that's
it's a big trigger for you.
that is a trigger. People that don't. I find rejection a trigger. When I'm rejected, it's a trigger because I feel I'm not good enough. And it's really
Rejection in a relationship or just generally any kind of rejection.
I don't think I've experienced rejection anywhere else but relationship.
Because I mean, it could
because
be
I have
friendships
the
or
other things I have control over. I think relationships we don't have control over, and rejection in relationships, it really triggers me. And then
I get over them quickly.
it triggers me, and then I have to question my worth, and I have to work through that. Am I worthy? Why did he do this? And so it's a trigger. It is. Well, you get over yourself.
When relationships break up and they end, I don't get triggered by, and I don't feel rejected. I actually do feel like I'm able to move on and kind of say, well, it's not necessarily my problem. It's just like we didn't work out for each other.
So do we gather that our triggers we need help for our triggers? Because sometimes some people say, oh, but I think you just
Dramatic.
you just over dramatic about things. You need help.
That triggers me.
When you need help, and I'm like, oh my god, what do you mean? I mean, I've had past a partner that would like, there's something wrong with you. You bloody need help, and I'm like, fuck you, man. It's not you are
Can you say
triggering
on this podcast.
for you. Like, fuck you, man. You triggering me because of the way you were speaking to me. So I think that's another thing that
I think
triggers.
you just thinking about this, I can see that you are getting triggered right now.
I'm already triggered by the fact that I'm talking about triggers.
You're triggering yourself.
But I think it's tone as well that
Tone.
triggers me.
Big one for me. Tone of
But-
voice is a big one for me. It's a big trigger.
Do you know that I used to have the bad tone. I also think about my tone recently, is that am I triggering other people because sometimes my tone and I know that people do pick it up, but when people has a tone and I'm like, how dare you speak to me like that? And that has nothing to do with childhood trauma.
No.
It has to do with the respect, I would assume.
And also about how, but that this was interesting. So it's about how you speak to others, but you are saying that sometimes we should actually check ourselves as well. In terms of maybe what we're doing is the trigger for them, and now it's a back and forth trigger. You asked earlier, do we need help for our triggers? Maybe it's good to speak to people about certain things that do triggers and see how to better manage. Like you asked me earlier on, how do you respond to when the childhood triggers happen? I mean, they don't happen often, but if you do, how do you ground yourself? I think it's about how do we process and how do we react to those triggers?
I think it's when you're conscious of what your triggers are and you manage it. I've learned to breathe, count to 10, walk out of a room sometimes, come back. I do feel that internally, the triggers, of course, it's a physical thing because you actually feel it coming. You listen to people and I can feel it coming inside me. So I've learned to be conscious of what triggers me, step out of a room, come back, be very clear about things, being unapologetic as well about what I say, because I don't want to be a pushover. If you don't like certain things that I'm saying to you that might be triggering you, I want to make my point across. So I'm not going to also be like apologetic that I'm upsetting you, because being upset and being triggered are two different
things. Yeah.
So I think we need to look at that. So definitely being conscious, definitely as we get older, I think we are becoming more aware, more self-aware of our triggers. And you know, the point, the thing that we used to say is, I can go from hero to zero in a split second. That was me. And I look at
you've learned to manage
I've
and
learned
handle
to
that better.
work through that.
Yeah. If I look at it now, I mean, we spoke early on about triggers and the negative versus the positive, but I mean, where we're going with this now, triggers are more of a negative thing.
Yeah. And of course, sometimes triggers are embarrassing.
Yeah.
It embarrasses you because then you're like, shit, you know, I've just embarrassed myself. So I think it's just literally also becomes a self-awareness when a security guard would trigger you because he, you know, you don't have your license and you're like, I need to get in. And, you know, that's a trigger. But that's just like me just being dramatic.
Or bossy because the guy is just doing his job.
I'm a leader, not a boss. I'm a boss babe.
That shouldn't be a trigger. That's just the guy doing his
You know,
job.
when somebody calls me like bossy, I'm not. That does not trigger me.
Because you know, you own it.
Yeah, because I own it. It never triggers me. So yeah. So I think triggers are negative.
It's mostly. It
Some are
feels like it's
positive.
mostly negative because you mentioned your dad in terms of that, and it's more of a good memory. It's a reminiscing kind of feeling. I think about something, if I had to choose a good trigger, it's almost like the Christmas season is a happy trigger for me.
I don't think that's a trigger. I think that's nostalgia.
Yeah, even your dad's one then.
Yeah, if you think about it,
so if we think about it after,
nostalgic.
it's nostalgic.
Yeah.
It's not a trigger because I think triggers.
Hey, actually, if you think about trigger, if you think about a gun and you get a trigger and a gun, there's
it's a
thing
negative
to it.
reaction.
So we've gathered that nostalgia is warm, fuzzy, you know, comforting feeling, and that triggers are trauma.
Definitely. I think we agree on that. Thank you for joining us on Outspoken Owls. Catch you next time.